Clarity is often described as freeing. People talk about it as if it brings peace, confidence, and direction. As if once you see things clearly, life becomes easier to move through. But many people discover something unexpected instead. Clarity feels lonely. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, in ways that are difficult to explain. They don't feel abandoned. They don't feel rejected. They simply notice that fewer things resonate. Fewer conversations land. Fewer shared assumptions exist. And the silence that replaces those assumptions can feel isolating. To understand why clarity feels like loneliness, it helps to understand what clarity actually removes. Clarity removes shared illusions. For most of life, connection is built on partial understanding. People bond over common narratives, common goals, common explanations for why things are the way they are. You don't need full agreement to feel connected. You only need overlapping stories. When clarity increases, those overlaps begin to shrink. You start seeing patterns others don't see. You stop reacting in expected ways. You question premises that others still rely on. This doesn't make you better. It makes you different. Indifference disrupts synchrony. Much of human connection depends on moving at the same psychological pace, reacting at similar speeds, sharing similar interpretations. Clarity changes your pace. You pause where others rush. You hesitate where others assert. You listen where others perform certainty. This shift is subtle, but it accumulates. People don't necessarily push you away, but they stop meeting you in the same places. Another reason clarity feels like loneliness is that it reduces emotional noise. Earlier in life, emotions are loud. They spill outward. They demand validation. They invite response. As clarity develops, emotions become quieter, more contained, more processed internally. This can look like emotional distance from the outside. People are used to connecting through shared reactions, shared outrage, shared excitement, shared frustration. When you no longer amplify these reactions, the usual points of connection weaken. It's not that you don't feel. It's that you no longer broadcast feeling as a way of relating. This often confuses others. They may interpret your calm as disinterest, your restraint as judgment, your silence as withdrawal. You are not withdrawing. You are simply no longer externalizing every internal process. Clarity also alters how you experience conversation. Before clarity, conversation is often about alignment, finding agreement, confirming shared beliefs, reinforcing group identity. After clarity, conversation becomes more observational. You notice inconsistencies. You hear underlying assumptions. You see where words are standing in for uncertainty. This awareness makes it harder to participate casually. You find yourself choosing silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because saying it would change the tone of the interaction. So you let things pass. Over time, this creates distance. not because you are disengaged, but because you are no longer unconsciously co-creating the same reality. Another factor is that clarity dissolves certain identities. Earlier connections are often built around roles: the helper, the achiever, the rebel, the responsible one, the emotional one. Those roles come with scripts. They tell others how to interact with you. They tell you how to show up. As clarity grows, these roles lose their grip. You stop performing them automatically. You respond more selectively. You act from choice rather than reflex. This disrupts familiar dynamics. People may not know how to relate to you without the old cues, and you may not feel compelled to reintroduce them. This is one of the quietest forms of loneliness. Not the absence of people, but the absence of the roles that once structured connection. Clarity also changes what feels worth discussing. Topics that once felt important lose their urgency. Arguments that once felt necessary feel circular. Concerns that once dominated attention feel disproportionate. This narrowing of interest can feel isolating. You are still present, still listening, but fewer things feel substantial enough to engage with fully. Others may experience this as detachment. You experience it as discernment. But discernment reduces surface-level interaction. Another reason clarity feels like loneliness is that it removes the need for constant reassurance. Earlier connections often include subtle exchanges of validation. Agreement signals safety. Shared outrage signals belonging. Shared anxiety signals mutual concern. As clarity develops, the need for these signals decreases. You are less reliant on external confirmation, less reactive to disagreement, less invested in being mirrored. This independence is stabilizing internally, but it reduces the frequency of relational touchpoints. Connection becomes quieter, less frequent, more intentional. Until new forms of connection develop, the space in between feels empty. Clarity also exposes how much connection was built on mutual confusion. This realization can be unsettling. You notice that some relationships were sustained by shared avoidance, shared denial, shared narratives that prevented deeper examination. As clarity dissolves these narratives, the connection weakens. This is not because anyone has changed dramatically. It is because the structure that held the relationship together is no longer intact. You are left with a choice: reinforce the old structure or allow the relationship to change. Allowing it to change often means allowing distance. Another aspect of clarity-induced loneliness is the loss of urgency. Urgency pulls people together. Deadlines, crises, conflicts, high-stakes emotions. Clarity reduces unnecessary urgency. You stop rushing. You stop escalating. You stop amplifying. This calmer state is internally sustainable, but it places you out of sync with environments that rely on urgency for cohesion. You are no longer moving at the same speed. This mismatch can feel isolating even when surrounded by others. People often misinterpret this phase as social withdrawal. In reality, it is a recalibration of attention. You are no longer scanning for connection in every interaction. You are no longer seeking alignment at all costs. You are more comfortable being misunderstood temporarily. But comfort with misunderstanding can look like distance. Another reason clarity feels lonely is that it changes how you experience being alone. Before clarity, being alone often feels like lack. Lack of stimulation, lack of validation, lack of engagement. After clarity, being alone feels neutral, sometimes even restful. This shift can make social interaction feel optional rather than necessary. When connection is no longer used to regulate internal states, its absence feels different. You are not avoiding people. You are no longer using people to manage discomfort. Until relationships reorganize around this new baseline, loneliness appears. It is important to note that clarity-based loneliness is not despair. It lacks panic, it lacks self-rejection, it lacks hopelessness. It is quieter, more spacious, more ambiguous. This ambiguity is often what people find unsettling. They are used to loneliness being loud and painful. This version is subtle and persistent. Another factor is that clarity increases responsibility for your own perspective. When you see clearly, you can no longer outsource interpretation. You cannot rely on the consensus to tell you what something means. You cannot default to group opinion for emotional orientation. This independence is stabilizing, but it also removes a layer of social buffering. You are more alone with your interpretations. That solitude can feel heavy before it feels empowering. Many people try to escape this phase by reintroducing noise. They seek constant interaction. They fill silence with content. They re-engage in familiar debates. They exaggerate opinions to provoke response. This provides temporary relief, but it delays adaptation. Clarity does not ask you to isolate. It asks you to tolerate the transition between old and new forms of connection. Connection after clarity is different. It is less frequent, but deeper. Less automatic, but more chosen. Less validating, but more real. Until those connections emerge, the absence of constant resonance feels like loneliness. This phase cannot be skipped. If you attempt to force connection at the old level of intensity, it feels performative. If you withdraw completely, it hardens into isolation. The balance emerges slowly. You begin to recognize which conversations still feel nourishing, which people can sit in ambiguity without rushing to fill it, which relationships adapt rather than collapse. These connections are quieter, but they are stable. Clarity also changes how you listen. You hear what people are actually saying and what they are avoiding. This awareness can make casual interaction feel draining. You are no longer just participating, you are processing. This additional cognitive load reduces the desire for constant engagement. You become selective. Selectivity can feel like loneliness when it first appears, especially if your environment values constant interaction. Over time, something important happens. The absence of constant connection creates space for depth. You begin to feel comfortable not being immediately understood, not being mirrored, not being responded to. This comfort changes how you show up. You speak when it matters. You listen without needing to respond. You allow silence without interpreting it as rejection. Loneliness gives way to solitude. Solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the absence of pressure to connect. If clarity has made you feel lonely, the most accurate interpretation is not that you have lost people. It is that you have lost shared illusions. New forms of connection take time to grow. They grow slower. They grow quieter. They grow without urgency. But they are more durable. Clarity does not remove connection, it removes noise. The loneliness you feel is not emptiness, it is space. Space where alignment must be chosen rather than assumed. Space where connection must be real rather than reflexive. That space feels uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar. But it is also where meaningful relationships eventually take root.